What is going on, Comic Fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic creator Kyle Starks. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Always excited to be out in the podcast world, do some podcast talk.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've been a big fan of your work. You have done a lot of just great books with Assassination Nation and the Six Sidekicks of Trigger Keaton. You've got two books right now with I Hate This Place and Where Monsters Lie. Like you just, and I haven't even named like Rock Candy Mountain. Like so many good stuff. Like,
Thanks, man.
yeah. So
We're trying the best we can.
So have you always liked comics? Like, did you grow up in comics, or was this kind of something that you came into later in life?
So yeah, this is always a good one. So when I was a kid, I always had a pull list. I don't remember ever not reading comics. I think my uncle probably got us into that because my parents are not, it is not their scene. My uncle's name is Tony Starks. Ha ha ha. He has always sort of had a side hustle of doing Silver Age and Golden Age comics. He used to write I always forget the word. He used to write a thing for like one of the comic price guides, an article. It was like a monthly article called Comics in a Flash. So I suspect he's responsible for it. Because I just can't imagine. Or my parents were like, well, they'll read these. We'll just keep getting them because they were reading them, which is all, and they could use them to make us do chores and, the like. So that might have had a big play into it. Me and my brother, my older brother, both started working at a comic shop when we were about 14. It was a comic shop. It was a video rental store. It was used books and music. It was baseball cards. It was pornography. It was an entire world of pop culture that we could just consume whenever we wanted to. That was the 90s, which in my opinion is just the worst period for comics. So I when I went off to college, I was done with it. I was going to go be a fine artist. I loved comics. There was a different time. I was telling my kids, my anime loving daughters, like it's just a different time. Like there was only like two other kids in school who I could talk to X-Men about,
Right.
It's just different times. But yeah, I mean, I think comics were so grimdark and just, they were so bad in the 90s. I got out of them for a long time and I went off I was going to be a fine artist, which I also was like, wisely, this is not the direction for me to go. And I ended up doing production design for a long time. But as I always had an affinity and I always tried to kind of keep up, but I wasn't buying. I was out drinking every night and, trying to find my future wife, which I successfully did. It was just a time without comics. But when I was starting to have my second kid, because I was like, oh, I'll never have time again. This is my origin story. I was like, I'll never have time again to do anything. And I made a list of all the stuff. And frankly, the first thing on the list was just finish a comic. It was just complete one comic. Because I had always drawn a bunch when I was a kid and never really finished anything. I did some little zine things here and there, but I wanted to do at that time, 24 pages or 32. I just wanted to do it. I was like, I'll never have time again. And I just wanted to do these things that I would never, the irony of course now is, I do it full time. It's all I do. Right. But I did a comic that I put on the web and I didn't advertise called Legend of the Rookie Thunder, which ended up getting discovered by, at the time, a very sort of influential comic journalism site and made my career in many ways just because it brought attention to something I found I really just loved doing. And I still do the process. I just love the process of making a comic. And good fortune here, good fortune there. And next thing you know, somehow I'm doing it as a living. It's crazy.
That's awesome. So it literally was just like, you're like, all right, I'm about to have a kid. I don't know,
second kid.
Second kid.
Yeah.
And you're like, as someone who has the second kid, you're right. You realize your time, once you're like, all right, we have one and then we have another one coming. You're like, my time's going to be very limited.
Over. Yeah.
It's no longer my own time. You write, you do art, but is there something that you gravitate towards that you like more of, the writing aspect or the art aspect of it?
I mean, so I started as what we in the industry call a cartoonist, which means I wrote and drew my own stuff, which was Sex Castle, which was my break. Then Kill Them All and Rock Candy Mountain, which were, I think, my first three. And I think I got Rick and Morty right before Rock Candy. I can't remember.
Okay.
So I wrote and drew my first three things. And even Rick and Morty, the deal was I get to draw the fifth issue, but that's where the real money is. There's no money in writing, as I still well know. That's my favorite. That's my happy spot, is when I'm writing and drawing my own stuff for trade that I'm going to kickstart, because there's no limitations. There's no editor. I get to I get to do the beats and the pacing that I want to do, that the story requires. But I say that. I mean, I all my stories I want people to read, and they're certainly more well read when I don't draw them. So it's a quandary of I'm making stories for people to consume and to entertain. And as much as I love the process of just sitting in my office, which is a basement, which is an unfinished basement, it's not like that's my happy spot is when I'm
Yeah.
making and drawing my own stuff. But you know what? I only get to do that now, like maybe once every 2 years, and even then, because writing is what pays the bills. I clearly I'm better at one than the other. Like you don't. That's not a trick. That's not a surprise to me. Um, but yeah, like my career's taken off because of my writing. So I certainly like my stories to be consumed more than I want to create them entirely myself. Like I'm not that type A. I'm very type A, but I'm not that type A.
Yeah. You like to, like you said, to write and create your own stories and do the art and aspect of it. Um, so when someone else comes on board to do the art, is there like, how do you handle that from someone who also does art? Like, is it easy to give that up once you're like, yeah, I can do this? Or is it like, I would have done this differently?
Well, so I answer the second part first because I'm just not I'm a passable artist. Like I
Okay.
think what I do fits my stories. I'm able to create the sort of energy but everyone I've worked with is better than I am. Like they're all better than I am. So they always take what I would have seen as in my head, and I'm like, oh, they did it better. And that's literally across the board,
Yeah.
everyone I've worked with. So that's great because I mean, here's a good. So I'm gonna segue because I will do this. So for Where Monsters Lie, um, which is my new book from Dark Horse, it's about
Yep.
a gated community for slasher villains. There is a bit. I mean, I always knew it was going to be in there. In fact, I'll do two of these. There's a bit where Baphomet, who is basically your giant rabid demon dog, Cujo dog, in my head, he comes out of the shadows behind a group of police officers and then he decimates them. I couldn't draw that. I can't draw that. And I mean, I could draw something that did those steps, but it wouldn't have the weight or the energy that Peter brought to it. Um, I just did Creep Show with Skybound. The anthology is out now, um, and I had a very specific visual of what a series of events would be. And Fran Galan, who I think is just unbelievable, just he nailed it. In fact, he did it better, and that's really the thing is like, oh, it's even better than the way I saw it. So I think the thing is like there's an advantage for me being a visual storyteller is that I'm
Yeah.
able to give clear directions, um, and sort of like clarity of storytelling. I think is the most important thing in comics, and I'm able to visualize that for the artist. Uh, but like for example, like I try not to give an artist more than like 6 or 7 panels on a page. I really try to stick it at six because that, even if they're a co-creator, and it is still we have to hit deadlines, and it is work for hire. I think for Old Head, which was the last book I cartooned, I think I averaged like 7.5 panels per page. Like that's like average. Because for me, I'll always do more work for my work than
Yeah.
I would ask somebody to do. Um, Chris Schweitzer, who I've worked with on Mars Attacks and Trigger Keaton, and who's colored most of my work, I love working with him because he will add the panels that I won't tell an artist to do because he knows like they have to be there. So there's pros and cons, right?
Right.
On one hand, it looks a lot better. Two, I will never. I think in Rock Candy Mountain 1, there's a page that has like 18 or 24 panels on it. I would never write that for somebody. I would never do that. And in some ways, it makes me have to work a little bit differently. Maybe the
Yeah.
book suffers. I don't think that's true. But like I really, after working on Rick and Morty and being aware how much there is a production element to making comics, at some point they have to be done. You can only ask someone to do so much. So that's the big difference. Is like the guy who colors when I draw my own books, I can destroy that guy. I can make him do all the work because I know it's for how I tell stories for myself is a little bit different. Just because I'm willing to suffer more
Yeah.
than I'd make someone else do. But I also can't do hero shots. There's all sorts of back and forths, right? There's pros and cons to both.
Well, it's funny that you brought that up because in Rock Candy Mountain and Sex Castle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the fight paneling, like that's where you see a lot of those 12,
Yes,
24 is just a
for
quick
sure.
fight shots and stuff. And I think that's a really interesting thing that I didn't realize that it's only in your books that you do the cartoon, the art and
Yeah, I try to keep the fight. Like the thing with so since I'm careful to not say comedy, but they are comedy action books or humorous action books,
Yeah.
and both of those things, comedy and action, both take space in terms of real estate on the page, and they also require pacing, and pacing is panel size. So how you use panel size repeatedly sets a tone for how dialogue is being read or how quickly it's being read, and the same for fight stuff. There's sort of like two schools of fights in comics. There's the Kirby style, which is like 3 panels, and then there's the other way, which is like maybe Frank Miller or me. I was like, I want to choreograph a fight. The fights mean something, and when I watch an action movie, which let's be honest, most comics are action movies, I like the fights. Like a good fight is a good fight, and so I really like to choreograph that. Um, and I just because of I'm doing more 20-page books, more sequential books, sequential, that's all right, floppies or whatever, monthly
Yeah.
books. You just don't have the same real estate as you have in a trade. I don't know. I wonder if someone's like, hey, let's make a book for Kickstarter together. If I wouldn't process that differently, because I'm like, oh, I can do a 6-page fight sequence. Again, Where Monsters Lie is a good example of this because it's kind of all that just spread over 4 issues,
Yeah.
where it's basically one fight. It's basically one big fight that occurs, and it just takes 4 issues to tell that. If I don't have me doing it or unlimited space, and I think I just got issue 3 to look at. I just got, which I think came out in stores last month, but
Yep.
neither here nor there. So I finally got to look at it in my hand. There it is. And it's like, oh, it's great. But it's like it literally is like you can see it's Sex Castle. It's one Sex Castle fight basically over 4 issues.
So you just expanded. You're basically like, I could do a literally like a 30 issue series of Where Monsters Lie that would fit into one issue of Sex Castle.
Yeah, right. Yes, because just of the fight sequence. But I just hesitate to do it. I just read someone who gave me their first book at this show in Muncie, and they go, it's our first book, and like there's so many panels. I'm like, artists aren't going to let you, they're not going. I don't think they'll let you do this. But like I said, the one I think the most talented. I don't want to say that. That's not right. Erica and Schweitzer both added panels, and they were panels that I would have added if when I was writing it, but I just won't ask them to do it. Right. So you see, like the people who like there's storytelling, and then there's sort of illustrators, and then there's just comic creators, and they're all good. It's just you have to know who you're working with, and sort of plan the story for that. I know for Schweitzer when we did Six Sidekicks, which is a great example. Me and him, we're both of the same mindset. So we'd be like, well, there's going to be a bunch of panels. It's like, yes, there is. There's going to be a bunch of panels. It just is the way it is. Because we're both on the same board. Like, this is what it takes to tell the story the way we want to tell it. And you just sort of consider your artist. You know what I mean? Like, there's
Right.
no good or bad. But I love a choreographed fight scene. And I think you can see that's where Monsters Lie is in many ways, is that I love a choreographed fight scene. And that's basically a 2-hour movie of one fight, of one sequence of events, where Agent Hayes sort of fights all the slashers at this gated community.
That's so good. Well, you mentioned Trigger Keaton. One of the things I really liked about it is, you have all these sidekick actors that come alongside that worked with this horrible person named Trigger.
The worst, yeah. He's awful.
But I really liked how you opened up each kind of issue with like the page of like the movie poster or the TV show poster,
Yeah,
and then kind of going into the show.
to the TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that was I'm assuming that was your idea of like, hey, I want this, and then can you bring this to life with it art style?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, Chris is Chris, but
Right.
yeah, we did those. So each issue does a flashback. Doesn't seem like the right word. It shows the first page is a, a section of the TV show. There's 6 different TV shows, obviously, or there's 5 TV shows. Correction, sorry, Kyle. To show the TV show, and then the next page is sort of like as they say like cut, and then you see Trigger being awful in this sort of flashback. And the reason why we did that was 2-part. One is because it's a cool little thing just to start each book with. The other reason, Schweitzer's out of the country today, so he'll never know I'm talking about it. But is that Skybound doesn't do chapter breaks. I don't know if you've ever noticed this with the Skybound OGN, but they don't do cover issues. They don't do the cover between each issue. It just seamlessly goes from one issue to the next.
Oh.
And so we don't love that. Switch was like, I don't like that because there's a beat you take after each issue. But Skybound likes it to be one story, which is great. And I like for Assassination, which was the first time it happened, it's a little disarming, but it's not noticeable. Which was lucky, frankly. And I hate this place. Like you can see also like there's so I sort of again you have to sort of adjust to whatever's in front of you. So it's partly like we want people to take a break in between sort of each issue,
Yeah.
and that's like a little reset. But also it's like even at the time it wasn't specific. I was like, how else? Why would we not do this? Like
Right.
why would we not do this to start each issue? Because we want people to see these TV shows, mostly dumb TV shows. And just sort of it tells you more about the like each of those tells more about the character who's involved. So they're a nice little introduction to whoever sort of is
Yeah.
the spotlight character of that issue.
Yeah. It's so good. So what is your process then for like, because you have a plethora of books and there's no way we're even going to be able to talk about everything that you work on. But like where, and they're so different and unique. There's threads that kind of fall through in some parts, but
Yeah.
what's your process for writing and coming up with storytelling ideas?
I mean, generally, I see some like I'm watching. So Where Monsters Lie is again an easy one on stores now. It's not it's sold out. You can't get it. Sorry. Wait for go ahead and pre-order the trade. It's sold out. So that's a good one. Like I like I hate this place too. Like I'll say what they were. It's that for Where Monsters Lie. I was watching that movie Fear Street on Netflix. I think it's the second one,
Okay.
whichever the second one was, the '70s one. And there's a bit where they're like, "Oh, this town is full of like every so many years there's like a new serial killer," and I just thought, well, that's it. Like that's interesting. What if all the serial killers lived in this? What if they all lived in the same place? And then but it seems like not even just that because it's like setting doesn't matter to me, which is what I'll circle around to. I hate this place because it's the same thing. It's like oh, and like I'm kind of interested like what does Chuck like he's somewhere between those movies. Like someone's paying for his cable. Like how did he order? Is he watching cable? Like he has to be, right? I mean, they're definitely getting food. Like how's Chucky getting food for his lady friend, or does she have to go all the time? Like that seems like anyway. I sort of became really interested in like the sort of domestic nature of these because they're still like even I mean some of them are just monsters, but like the
Right.
Saw man, like surely he likes to see a movie every now and then, right? Like surely the Saw killer likes to go check out whatever the popular movie is or something. And then I was like, who's building his traps? Because there's never like diagram. He's not doing it. Like he doesn't have. There's not like a soldering iron back there, and there's like one where there's like a pit full of syringes. It's like who got the syringes and was he digging that pit? I don't know. So I was like all these things. I was like these are really interesting, and I wonder what the answer is. And that sort of came from Fear Street because I'll see just one little thing, and it'll be like I'm interested in this. Or for I Hate This Place. Years ago, I heard about Skinwalker Ranch, and I was like so interested. This was years ago when I think all there was there was like an audio book by the guy who would co-host Coast to Coast every now and then,
Okay.
or he was the replacement co-host to Art Bell, Nori. I think his last name is Nori. And I listened to a popular horror podcast, and I was like, this is really interesting. How is it that there isn't anything like there isn't a book or that I know? I mean, I'm sure there is, but I've never seen a movie or heard of a book where it's like, oh, this place has all of the stuff. It has ghosts and monsters and cryptids and some sort of and I'm like UFOs. And I'm like, it's so interesting. Why isn't I've never heard of this? And I just thought, and I said something to Kirkman. I was like, this is an interesting setting at New York Comic Con many years ago, and he's like, "Yeah, you should just go ahead and make that." And I'm like, "Well, that's not a story; that's just a setting." And that's usually how it starts. Is like I'll get something, and I'm like, "Oh, I wonder if I could do this." I'm wondering what this is, and but it like that setting doesn't matter to me. It's always like, well, what's the story that happens
Right.
there? And that so the bit is always I see something and I go, oh, I'd like to do a heist thing, you know what I mean, or
Yeah.
whatever. For Rock Candy Mountain, I love action movies. I love good action movies, and I was like, there's America is not the only country, So I started watching like sort of old kung fu movies and heard about wuxia, which is like a very specific genre of film that doesn't exist here. And I was like, what's the American version? What's the Kyle Starks version of that? And it's always like that. It's always me going, well, that's interesting. I wonder what my version of that is. And then, but more, it's like, what's the story that I want to tell? Um, and like, Where Monsters Lie is very much a romp. Um, but I think when you get to the end, you'll see it's the same thing he always does, which is just like, what is family? And for that book, it's like, I was like, what's actually bad? Like, who are the actual monsters?
Mhm.
What I felt like we were in a place where like we were being very casual about evil, And so like these guys, these murderers, these like spree killers, just like complaining about trash cans in their HOA violations to be like, well, that seems really likable. It seems very modern, but it's like also they kill people, like they kill teenagers. So that's what I think like that. That's like, so what's the story I want to tell, or how to make that setting as a story interesting,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I've come to appreciate about you in your writing style is, I ran into you at C2E2, and I mentioned this is you have a quick wit in your story of where there is timing for humor when it needs to be, and that's a difficult thing I think in comics. Like I think translating comedy or comedy elements
Yes.
into writing is a lot more difficult than seeing it visually.
Yeah. Well, and there's yes, that's why there's, and I'm not tooting my horn. There's very few people who consistently do it well, and I think Chip does it. I think Mark Russell does it. I think Ryan Brown does it. Evan Dorkin, I think, does it. I'm sure there are guys I'm forgetting who do it in a way that's like it's always amusing.
Mhm.
I think comedy, and I've spoken at length about this because I'm trying to not use the word comedy with my new work. Where Monsters Lie is the first issue is funny, but I was like, please don't call it funny because comedy is a bad word in the direct market.
Mm.
And of course, the reason why that is like think how many times people have been burned by, hey, here's this new funny book, and it's like it's not funny. It's like sight gags and low
Right.
hanging fruit, and it's like really the lowest common denominator of humor. Um, and you have to understand how one, I guess, how comedy works and how to recreate it in terms of beats and panels and spacing and page turns. And I say, just like you want to do comedy for everybody. You don't want to just do the things that you yourself think are funny, or else like it's limited. It's so limited. So you have to think about the audience, and you have to think about what funny sort of exists in different ways. Like it's interesting to me. Like I like outside of a few books, which are for sure like Sex Castle is for sure a comedy book. Um, Even though it's about a very serious subject matter to me, which is like personal decisions and parental responsibility, and but for the most part, like after a couple of books, like it's really like, well, it's humorous, I suppose, but it's like it's more of an action book, right? But
Yeah.
that's probably not true. They're probably more funny than I just don't want to admit it now because I want people to buy the books. But I am trying. Like, I hate this place. To me, Kirkman was like, don't do it as a comedy, and I was like, okay, I won't. But everyone's like, oh, it's really funny, and I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I guess it's just the way I am. It's just going to be the way I am, because I want these characters to be charming and likable. And I think for me, the way you like somebody is that they're funny, right? Like, they say things that are humorous. I think that's just what I'm attracted
Yeah.
to. Um, so we're hoping. Listen, we're going to do less funny, but I think the best stories have everything.
Right.
They have things that make you sad. They make things that make you laugh. They make things that make you tense. Um, and so it'll probably always be there. It'll probably always be there that someone's a little funny. I say that I have a couple projects where probably not. Um, I say that, and once I get in there, the thing is like, oh, this is a beat. This is a moment, and I'll be like, joke. I know I will, or not even joke. Just like this is a charming moment to me, a charming character moment, and those are almost always easily perceived as humorous.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we'll see.
I almost wonder if like because you have some of the smart wit in there that because we don't see comedy aspect, humor in comics very often, that even the littlest hint of it, people are like, oh, this is, because like you had
For
that with
sure.
Where Monsters Lie, like in issue 1, you have these serial killers who are horrible people and they're sitting next to each other in kind of like a meeting room. And he's just like, why do I have to sit next to this one all the
There's not
time?
assigned seats, Richard. I've
Right.
told you this time and time again. Yeah, and I think like definitely like Dante Howard's their breakout character of 2022, and I hate this place. So like he's so funny, and I'm like, I guess so. Like maybe the take like that's my best selling book, and maybe the takeaway is like people at that number of purchasing issues like don't see anything funny at all. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. I do
Yeah.
know like when I started, I hate this place. Um, it was literally the pandemic, right? I mean, it was literally the pandemic, and I was very. Let me back up. I love to tell the story because I hate to tell this story. So I did Old Head as a Kickstarter. Old Head is about a father and daughter who go to bury his mother, who they find out lives next door to monsters, and there's a weird history, and it's about legacy and toxic masculinity and fighting, and it's also funny. Um, so I made this book. Chris Schweitzer, who is my sort of virtual studio mate, my best friend and colors of book, he's like, "This is your best book." And I'm like, it's good. I can't sell it. Like me, what I just said doesn't even really describe that book for what it is. I don't think, because there's so much happening. Um, and we did Image, which I love to do because I want things in a catalog so they exist forever. Again, old heads about legacy because I'm fixated on it as a creative now. Um, and Image was like, well, how? And I don't know why they asked me because they never asked me this before. But like, how many copies should we print? And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem like a Kyle question. That seems like an Image question. And they said, well, based on your other books that we've printed for you, we're going to do 4,000 copies. And to me, that's nothing. I know it's a lot in terms of the industry, but like I live in the third largest city in Indiana, a state where you can only name one city, right? No one can name a second. I mean, if you live near Indiana, maybe.
I was
But
gonna say I'm
someone
in
in
Ohio. I can fold that theory.
Yeah,
But
but someone in Iowa
right.
cannot name more than Indianapolis, right?
Yep.
I live in the third largest city. It's a quarter million people. It's a quarter of a million people, and I can't sell 5,000 copies of a book across the world. And I was very fixated on that.
Mm.
And I was like, it's because it's comedy. And one editor said the same thing to me. Kirkman was like, don't do a comedy. And I was very sort of in my head because I just want readers. Like
Right.
I'm not making these books for myself, and I'm not making them for a page. I mean, listen, I am making for a page, but that's not my intention. My
Right.
intention is I'm making stories to entertain people and for them to consume. And so to be like, man, my legacy with this book, the best it will ever do is be seen by 4,000 people one time, probably, right? And it's like that's very upsetting to me. And so it's like I'm not going to do comedy. I'm going to listen to these people. I'm not going to do comedy. I'm going to do I Hate This Place. But it's during the pandemic, and I think there's like a lot of there. You can see that like they can never leave the ranch. Like they're trapped on this ranch as we were all sort of, and that's completely subconscious. That was not intentional. Scary places you can't leave are scarier than places you could just walk away from. That's just the logical impetus
Right.
for that. But clearly, I was like, you can't go anywhere, and it's bad everywhere, right? If you do go outside, it's bad, and you can't even leave that. You're always stuck in it. And I was really like down on it. But during the sort of back half of the pandemic, I did this comic book for free. And I'll pay what you want. It's not, you can't get it out. Sorry. But I did this comic for free and I wrote and I drew it and it saved me through the pandemic. Cause I was like, I forgot how much I love this and I forgot how much I love making people happy. And my sort of walk away was, well, if my legacy is twice a year, I make 4,000 people happy for 45 minutes. I'll take it, right? Like that's a pretty good. It's not the one I want, but it's like I'll take that. Like that's
Yeah.
so I'm not ashamed of like I'm kind of sticking to comedy, and of course then like Peacemaker happens, which is like well we want you for that. We want you for that thing that you've done well. So I was like, oh great, well I guess like we'll figure it out. Like I'm very much in a place where it's like I'm not like I accept that comedy is a bad word, which it is. It really is. Like if you look at any comedy series, they do not sell well. Um, but it's like also it's like, well, I like it. I like doing that. But I also want to do other things. So I'm wanting to do more serious stuff. And but yeah, anyway, comedy. I think it's complicated. People don't like it, but if
Yeah.
they do, they do. Like people who know, it's just hard to do. And I think people have been let down so many times
Yeah.
in the direct market, especially the big two stuff. I mean, like if you were like, let's do the top 10 funniest big two comics, that's a tough list, right? I mean, and some of it, it's like, can we use this license? Can we use like Dorkins,
Right.
Bill and Ted from Marvel? Like, no, you can't use that. It has to be big two. You're like, well, Justice League of America with Giffen and DeMatteis and can we use Flintstones? Like, no, you can't use Flintstones. Oh shit. It's tough. It's a tough list,
Yeah.
right? And that's the majority of comic buying. So it's just tough. Someone's gonna be like, you didn't mention this, this, and this. And I'm like, I know I'm on the spot, man. I don't know what to tell you. There's good stuff. I bet 10 to do 10 killer. You know what I mean? It's tough. It's tough to
Yeah.
do. And I think that's why comedy people just like, and also even like think about even like just if you're like, hey man, you should watch. I just watched this movie last night and it's so funny. Is that it's subjective, but
It,
like the guys who are very good at making those movies, they're always good for everybody, right? And this is a bad example because someone's gonna be like, that movie's done, but like, and I'm blanking on his name, like the guy who made Austin Powers, right?
Mike
Everyone thought
Myers.
Austin Powers was, yeah, everyone, well, not the director writer.
Oh, oh, oh. Jay, was it Jay Roach?
Maybe,
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know,
Doesn't
I
matter.
don't know. But like those, like there's, if you were like, no, this movie is not funny at all. You're in the minority. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
there's certain people who can do it. And again, I don't want to toot my horn, but I think my stuff is consistently entertaining. I don't know if you're going to die keeling over, but I don't think you'll be like, well, that was dumb. You know what I mean?
right.
Like, I think there'll be something in there for everybody. And I think the guys who are good at it, which the guys who I named, and again, I'm sure I'm forgetting someone. Those are my
Yeah.
don't name these guys if you have to list. They're always good. It's always good, and it's just such a minority of people who are able who do it well.
Yeah.
That was a
So
long talk about comedy and comics, a long one.
we're
Ugh.
sorry to have our longest conversation about something you hate to have mentioned. What do I do? That's what I do. I'm sorry.
No, because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the side. I don't want to stick, but I think the side is like I think that's why horrors became really such the really sort of the third category for major comics because it started being done so well by so many people. So it's like, oh, well, I'll try that, and like if people like it. All those popular genres people like you know, like anything sci-fi, horror, action, superheroes. Um, in comics, they work too. It's just like for them to sort of have that groundswell, a bunch of people have to do it in a way that it's not like risky. And I think probably if you're like, let's go back to 1997 and get all the horror comics, I bet they are not super great. I just named a year. Again, people don't have me. I'm just saying things. But I bet if you got like the last 3 years worth of horror comics, like just a random, I bet they're pretty good.
Yeah.
I bet they're pretty good, especially like you know the Tinian stuff. Like if you get like three Tinians in there, you're good anyway.
Right.
So,
So
so yeah, maybe one day comedy. Everyone will be
and
there'll be
we'll
like
bring
seven killer. There'll be the James Tinian of comedy,
it'll
and
be
like people will
it'll
just be losing their minds. Yeah.
it'll all come full circle. You mentioned it. We mentioned at the beginning. You mentioned it kind of there in that little segment there. How did you have a book coming out soon with DC with Peacemaker? How did that come about?
So this is also I would like to say at the very beginning I said I've been lucky repeatedly. With that first comic, I didn't promote it; it just got discovered. Um, I ended up to be sort of a tag along with Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky during the height of Sex Criminals, and they wanted Matt wanted Sex Castle, which was a Kickstarter. He liked it. He put me in touch with Image. Like these things are good luck. You know, they're just good luck. So I love the Peacemaker show. I love James Gunn. I think James Gunn does very similar things that I do, but better, obviously, because he's James Gunn. But where it's like we like little characters, and then to make them interesting, and then to put them in a context that's interesting, and to tell a story that sort of says something about the human condition, maybe. I love Peacemaker. I love Suicide Squad. I thought they were so great and so fun. I really celebrate. I really like James Gunn a lot, but I never thought it's what do I like the best things of my stories to date pre my sort of horror is big dumb guys doing big dumb action, but it's actually there's more going on. It's
Right.
about found friendship, it's about legacy, it's about how our actions affect others, it's about trauma. um and so at the time I was like, man, I love this, like this is so good. It's exactly like this is the superhero story that I would make basically. But I just enjoyed it. I never would have thought anything. And one of my Twitter mutuals tweeted, "Hey DC, why isn't there a Peacemaker comic, and why isn't Kyle Starks doing it?" And I was like, "Oh, I would do such a good job because it's just what I do. It's literally what
Yeah.
I do, right?" And so
Yeah.
I retweeted it, and I'd be like, "Ha ha ha, call me." You know what I mean? Like, ha ha ha, I am available. And like I immediately got a DM. And listen, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Um, but I got a DM, and they're like, we're thinking about doing a thing. Do you want to send a pitch? And I was like, I absolutely do. And it's kind of will be my first full issue, you know, sort of big two stuff. So it's very exciting to sort of like to get the one that I'd actually do a good job on, that I'd want to do a good job on, that was suited to my skills. Someone else, it was some journalist, I think, some were like, "This is perfect casting," and I agree.
Yeah.
And like, how could it get better? Like, put Steve Pugh on it. Like, who's going to? Because the thing is, for me, is like I want to look like when we do this, because they sent me sort of options, and they're like, here's sort of the cartoony option, and I'm like, you don't want to do cartoony. You play it straight because the jokes are the jokes. Like you want it to look like a superhero comic. You want it to read like a superhero comic. You don't want to be real hammy with it because it changed. Then it becomes like slapsticky, and you don't want
Yeah.
that. Like Steve Pugh, like who could you ask for better to do those things? Nobody. It's literally perfect casting. You love to see it when editorial comes in so strong, just hitting home runs. I think about the great editors do that. I think about Erica and Ryan North on Squirrel Girl. Like
Mm.
what whoever is Wilmoth, whoever was like, my editors are Matt Levine and Chris Conway. They're amazing. They were so great to work with. But to be able to be like, this is the pair, right? This is
Yep.
the pair we want on this project is such an art form. Um, that yeah, I couldn't ask for a better artist, and I couldn't ask for a better project just because it plays to my strengths so immensely.
Yeah. I when I like it's so funny and cool to hear that origin story of how this came about because I had obviously been reading Where Monsters Lie and I Hate This Place, and Assassination Nation, but then when I reached out I started going through more of your backlog and Mars Attacks and everything, just
Yeah,
consuming it, and as more and more I consumed I was like, oh my goodness, this is a perfect casting for Peacemaker to bring what you can take from like elements of the show aspect kind of mindset of Peacemaker
yeah,
that we have to what you bring to comics. And I was like, and then you bring Steve Pugh, who I first saw with, I think we mentioned
and
earlier,
Flintstones.
Flintstones.
Yeah,
Yeah, so good.
yeah,
um
it's so good. He's hitting home runs. It's amazing. It's all good. Chris Anka on covers, like every we have a million great variant covers. Like I've never been, which is a whole different convert. Like who knew? Like they like I love Dan Hip. I I I think I've loved Dan Hip since before Teen Titans. Honestly, I love him. And they're like, oh, here's the Dan Hip cover, and I'm like, oh, hold on, what? What are you talking? Like Dan Hip's doing a cover, one of my covers. But the Chris Anchor is doing A and B, which is like a movie treatment, and every single one is so good. The colors are so good. It's just a really great team, and it's a shout out to. I mean, like huge props to DC for putting that together
yeah.
because it could have been anybody. I mean, they could have picked anybody to do it. No one would say no to doing a Peacemaker comic. Um, but like everyone who's on a variant, the variants are so unbelievable. Like I listen, listen. He looks around. Sometimes I get variants and I go, it's okay.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. Thank you so much for your effort. We love. Sometimes like, that's okay.
Yeah.
I've not had that experience, and there's a bunch of variants on this book where I'm like, that's so good. That's so good. How is it? How are they all different and they're all so good? So yeah, I'm doing a variant, so there'll be one bad one for sure. There'll be one that's only okay, right? They'll be like, it'll be mine. Well, maybe listen, I'll tell you, I kind of feel that way now, and I think I did some of my best work. But it's like it's not Daniel Warren Johnson. It's not Dan Hip. It's not Tom Riley. Tom Riley's cover is so good for issue 2. Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like it's really fortuitous, and that's in many ways my career. Is like all you can do is sort of make the best stuff you can,
Yeah.
and make stuff that you'll be happy with. As I always say, like I don't think I try not to make anything that I make things for me. I want them to exist in the
Right.
world. I want to do not my version of Peacemaker, but I want to do more of that show because that's what I want, right? Um, and because its aesthetics are very similar to what I would do anyway. But it's like I want more of that. I want more of the show. That's what I want. Um, it's very fortuitous because it could have been a bad artist. It could have been a bunch of ugly covers, and it could have been a bad editorial experience. Like it's very lucky. It's just I've
Yeah.
been very lucky repeatedly, and um, I always say to Matt Fraction, who is one of the two guys, the guy who was at Comics Alliance too. I'm like, I'm indebted. Like if you guys were like, and I say to my wife, I'm like, if Matt Fraction calls, like, hey, we're killing the president today, I'd be like, babe, I got to do it. Matt's cashing it in, right? And but even Matt, and I thank him every time I see him. I'm like, I'm so appreciative. None of this would happen without you. And he's like, the book was good. And listen, that's true. It's I mean, again, I'm not tooting my horn, but it's like I made good
Yeah.
books because I made them to be the books that I wanted to read and consume. But there's a million good things that no one sees, that gets overlooked, that slides between the cracks. And so it's very lucky over and over. Um, like even being good, which I say as humbly as possible, because I don't know how true it is, with 4,000 copies of Old Head being made, right?
Yeah.
Um, is that there's a lot of good things that just never get seen. So I'm very lucky over and over and over. And all you can do is make good stuff and hope that, sort of good things follow behind it.
So Sex Castle was just an homage to you and Matt Fraction as killing the president then.
No, it was before. It's before. I made that before. Sex Cat. Like again, I can talk forever. The Legend of Ricky Thunder. I was like, I need to finish a comic. What is something that I will not lose interest in, right? So I made this wrestling comic because at the time there were not any, and I was like, that's interesting, and I like wrestling, and I'm going to do this comic. And I did it, and it kept me interested. And so once I finished that, I'm like, what else do I like? And I was raised on 80s action movies. And I was like, I want to make not an homage, not a satire, not a spoof, because those are bad to me. In my opinion, those are rarely enjoyable. I want to make the best 80s action movie never made. And that, so it's like, is going sort of through like, what do I like? What are the things that I'm going to remain interested in and I want to make for myself? Because they don't exist. Or I think I like that. What's my version of it? Because I want that to, I want to see what that is. Because I think my version will be more aimed at my sensibilities, right?
Yeah.
So that's your old head. Like old head, there's basketball stuff in it because I love basketball stuff, and it's got horror stuff in it because I was like they like Fright Night, all the Fright Night sort of element. Like I love that. Like I love that stuff. And you can see like old head is literally like the sort of pivot book from where I went from maybe hard comedy to sort of like maybe not just hard comedy all the time, maybe not just action movies all the time or action stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
oof, I can go on. I'm a talker.
so we as we're wrapping up here, we mentioned PeaceMaker, and we were talking about how the team came about, and you kind of mentioned that you wanted to kind of continue that story that you saw on the show. Is it
For
six?
sure.
It's 6 issues, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's 6
So
issues.
what kind of is your PeaceMaker what can you share about PeaceMaker that you're working on?
Man, that's a tough open-ended question. I maybe not for sure how to open. I for sure, like early discussions were what do we want this book to be?
Yeah.
And I said you give the people more of what they want. That's what I want. I love the show and I want more of the show. But it can't be that the show is filming. It's James
Right.
Gunn's thing. So sort of the end, like let's get it as close to the show as legally we can. Like I pitched it with certain characters that I wasn't able to use because they're James Gunn's characters, right? But I do a thing where the first page of the book is this couple at a grocery store complaining about that was like they were making the comic and Watchmen into a movie, Tales of the Black Freighter, and like they're going to ruin it, like you know what I mean? Like it's my favorite comic, they're going to ruin it. They're always different, and they're like, why is it different? And they're like, oh, probably legal reasons. And the other guy's like, no, it's because these writers think they're so smart. Because that's you know what I mean? Whenever you see like the movie adaptation, you're like, why didn't they just do the same thing?
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Like, why didn't they just do the same thing? Like that version was good. Why mess with it? So I wanted to let people know, like right out, it's like we would have loved to have just done more PeaceMaker with certain characters that I wasn't able to use. I just want to I want people to have that fix because I wanted that fix so badly. So it's very much sort of that, and to sort of introduce that version of the character, even though it's Black Label, so they're not. But I think like whenever a character exists, Peacemaker's in a lot of comics right now, but it's not that Peacemaker. It's
Yeah.
always like a weird, and he's fluid depending on who's writing him because he hasn't never been used basically because he was not a great character. But that version of the character, that version, the John Cena, James Gunn Peacemaker, I think it's such a modern superhero. That's like, man, he should exist. The comic landscape will benefit from a character like that. And of course, you know what's going to happen, which is this is a full circle. It's just going to be low hanging fruit and bad bits, and someone's going to make it the lowest common denominator. And hopefully, the case is like people are like, well, that's not who that character is. Like he's not like this character has like depths to them.
Yeah.
Even like I think I'm just putting this out there. Just think about it. Imagine that Peacemaker, this one who's juvenile and violent and good at being violent, but also like sort of considerate and willing to learn and like accept that humans are different and that they fail and it's okay to fail. Imagine that character during Crisis on the Infinite Earth. Isn't that interesting? Doesn't it add like a whole different thing? And it's like I think that's a very modern character
Yeah.
for them to be. I'm me. I'm not great. I'm doing the best I can. You're you, and I accept that. But also, I'm going to kill everybody. Because peace is very important. Because I have this fixation that's very important. I think that's really interesting. That's the thing. I hope. I'm more than anything, people who like the show, I'm giving them. We endeavor to be like, oh, that was great. It's the same vibes, same fun, same everything. And I think we successfully did that. So I'm stoked about it. I'm stoked about what it's going to lead to. And what's next? Who knows? Maybe I'm a superhero boy now. Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows?
Who knows?
Well, Kyle, thank you so much just for taking some time to talk about comics. And Where can people follow along with you and what you're creating?
Yeah, I'm the Kyle Starks on all social medias. And you can follow me there. I have a store, kylestarks.com. Don't buy from me unless it's something I have that no one else has. Buy it from your local comic shop. It makes my numbers look good and it keeps your comic shop in business. But we like that. Um, I have a Patreon. Patrons are always good. If you just want to support someone, it's Patreon Kyle Starks, not the Kyle Starks there. I do a sticker club where each month for $5, I send out 2 stickers that or whatever I want them to be, themed stickers. Yeah, man, when we're busy, we're the busiest we've ever been. Lots of stuff are happening. So, I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago. I'm 46. I made my first comic, 10 years ago, or well, 12 years ago, and they're like, oh, like you're an up and comer, like a hot up and comer. And they're like, that probably did that insult you? And I'm like, no, I'm so stoked to be hot. I'm so excited. Like, who cares? Like how old? I haven't been doing it that long. Even like some people
Yeah.
do it 20 years before they get an up and comer. So I'm stoked about it. But I feel like I'm like now is my moment where it's like finally like it's starting to sort of move upward. So it should be interesting, an exciting ride. Jump on the rocket ship now or whatever. I don't know if that's even right. But yeah, the Kyle Starks. I'm mostly active on Instagram and
Okay.
Twitter, but it's everywhere.
Perfect. Well, gang, again, check out the books that we've talked about on the show, and make sure you guys are checking out Peacemaker. I know I can't wait to get that series, but man, Kyle, thank you again so much for just
May
taking
2nd.
some time. So
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
May
Good time.
2nd, indeed.
May
So
2nd. Free comic book day week.
yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
So go support your LCS gang. And with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.